the women's liberation movement sort of emerges truly in the context of an international struggle. Begins about Vietnam, but also remember, if you look at any of the posters and leaflets about International Women's Day, the women's movement supported Palestinian women. We supported women in Bolivia. We supported the women of the ANC. We supported all the women in the freedom struggles, the women in China. You know, there's a letter, I mean, I have it, I love it. There's a letter that I wrote along with Janet Meadows Hughes of Radical Women about Madam Bin and the National Liberation Front, where we actually say, the American press is making fun of Madam Bin, but they don't understand that in Vietnam women are 100% liberated. I read this now, I go, you know. But that was part of the internationalist perspective. And I believe that that kind of internationalism, combined with feminist activity against the war in Vietnam, began the process of understanding the gendered implication of militarism and war. And so, you know, Cynthia Enloe would not have emerged if it hadn't been for this women's movement. That is, the foundation was set for saying, just a minute, war is as gendered as anything else. And so, I mean, I think that those were some of our great the way in which we made theoretical breakthroughs. The first leaflets we would write were women against war. That's not particularly what today's academics would call theorizing. We would struggle with how do you make the argument about why should women be against the war as opposed to men? And so you have to deal with the issue of the domestic front, consumption, what the war means for women losing sons or husbands, what it means in terms of the higher cost of meat, what it means in terms of economic dislocations. So I think that began the process. And at that moment, you know, the draft was all men, and then when Carter becomes president, there's no draft, but he says that women and men are going to sign up within the post office. I don't know if they still have to, I don't know. But there was a big debate about should women be drafted. Now argued yes. The radical women's movement said no. So I think all of this began the process of saying, just a minute, how can we look at war and militarism and so forth? And when the India-Bengali War broke out, and the Indian soldiers mass raped the Bengali women, and Susan Brown Miller's brilliant and somewhat flawed book on rape begins to look at rape as a tool, you know, a political tool of war. All this begins this process of now looking at war, militarization in a profoundly gendered way.